So do you remember the new WKRP in Cincinnati from 1992? Yeah, I forgot about it too. You know why? It wasn't any good. But Howard Hesseman's on Later with Bob Costas from September 7th, 1992, promoting the show. He talks at length about being in the committee and how he got to start in showbiz out in San Francisco. And, Costas presses him on reconciling going from being a hippie radical to being part of the system.
Thanks for staying up later. Howard Hesseman is with us tonight, and you know him from his television roles on Soap and One Day at a Time and Head of the Class, and of course his Johnny Fever on WKRP in Cincinnati, which is back on the air now, and we'll talk about all those things in due course. But as the generalization, I think it's fair to say that people think of you as a 60s guy with a few modifications, still knocking around in the 80s and 90s. Is that fair?
I guess so. A lot of modifications that one encountered in the 60s tend to stay with me. Time and again people say, well, what is it about the 60s? Gee, I don't know. I suppose if you came of age in the 30s, there are things that happened to you then that were in your realm of experience that stick with you for the rest of your life. I don't think in that respect I'm that much different than most people who managed to come through San Francisco in the 1960s. But then I don't know all of them. So.
Of course, you started in Salem, Oregon.
Yeah.
And I read somewhere that the main theme of your youth was, how do I get out of here?
Basically, yeah. I was not a big fan of the rain. I think I was probably in my late 20s before I realized that the reason for my general depression each winter was that the sky was grayer and it seemed to be threatening to rain in San Francisco. My childhood was not a particularly happy one, and I think I somehow confused that with the weather.
Was San Francisco really the touchstone for you, though? When you got to San Francisco, did it start to happen for you?
I think the latter portion of that phrase, or that word, touchstone, is the operative one. San Francisco was such a seething cauldron in the 60s.
Yeah.
I met a lot of people who seemed, as artists, intense, if not vital, in terms of their connection to their work. And it was a turnaround for me as an actor in that I had visions of becoming an actor, but didn't really know what was entailed, didn't know how I would go about doing that, and I think of it as slipping into it accidentally, just kind of following my nose, and suddenly I get an equity card and I'm in this company called the Committee, this improvisational company. I know that I must have had a little more thought going on. I must have been a little more ambitious or had a slightly more developed agenda, but it wasn't one I was ever willing to admit to myself. I think of myself as a slow learner, a slow person. Bob and Ray, a slow talker.
Right.
Everything came late for me. My 6-year molars appeared when I was 9, and it's just kind of worked that way.
Sort of 50% behind by my calculations.
Yeah. I was 24 years old. I had the opportunity to work in an equity theater, knew that I didn't really want to continue to be a bartender for the rest of my life, and realized that since I had no other trade or skill with which to earn a living, and I really enjoyed acting, that maybe I should give this a try.
Well, you might have been a little bit behind, but the committee was way ahead. And to appreciate what it was, you can't just look at the content, which might not be so shocking now.
No.
You got to consider it in its context, in its time.
Yeah.
People weren't doing stuff like that.
No.
And when that showed up on television, even if it was at the fringes of television, people almost fainted.
And it was the most watered-down versions of the safest pieces that we had that could appear on television.
What was the most outrageous skit, or 2 or 3 skits you can think of that the committee did that were too much on the edge to make it to television in those days, but that you were doing on stage?
We used to do a sketch called Blind Date that began in a woman's apartment. Obviously, she was readying herself to go out for the evening, and there's a knock at the door, and a rather crude man, I started to say young man, but that was then, a rather crude man appears, and he's brought along a six-pack of beer, and he's pretty excited about this blind date that's been set up by a friend of his with her, and discovers probably within about 2 minutes that she is indeed blind. She announces that she's blind. She's not a sighted person. And as a result of this information, he's a little startled. He's never met anybody who's blind before. And certainly lends new meaning to the term blind date for him. He begins sizing her up physically and testing to make sure that she really is blind.
You know, because there aren't very many people around, and I'm very familiar with the surroundings. What it really amounts to... I spent like 6 months in my room. I wouldn't even come out. And then, you know, eventually I realized that I was feeling sorry for myself. So I started to memorize the rooms and the rest of the house. And finally, I felt that I could, you know, move back here into the city and have my own apartment.
He continues with this behavior, and she finally, he says, you know, we really ought to get going to the party. She says, I don't think I can go. I really don't think I should go. And in fact, there's something I want to tell you. I'm not blind. He's rather stunned by this. She repeats, I said I'm not blind, and his response is, yeah, I'm not deaf. I heard you, but what's the deal? I wish I'd have known this was a test. And she said, well, it's exactly what it is. You know, it's just a little something that I go through to kind of separate
the men from the boys.
Yeah, and you didn't pass. And he's a little put out, and they exchange words, and he leaves. She begins tidying up from his visit. There's a knock at the door. She goes back. He is standing outside in the hallway on his knees.
Look, Sonny, I'm not laughing at you.
Somebody behind me?
Well, I mean, I guess I feel kind of small myself.
Well, you want to go to the party then?
Sure, why not?
We're going to look silly dancing.
Well, you know, the scene is about a lot of different things. Men and women's attitudes and paranoia toward one another, and that I won't characterize what the scene is about. In answer to your question, we were doing that scene, I think, in 1965. We finally did it on a show called Midnight Special.
Sure.
In maybe 1972, it may have been later, but it was deemed passable for late night kids sort of rock and roll oriented television. There was no way that we could approach doing that on network TV.
How have you been able to keep whatever was the pearl in the oyster of the 60s experience and the kind of sociological influences that forged your personality and your point of view? How have you been able to keep that intact now that the life in the fast lane has ended for you, and you're in a mellower place, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. I wish I could answer you. I don't know how I've been able to keep that. You know, I assume that I have because people tell me that I have. I guess I don't examine my values that closely. I don't look at it analytically. I just, I don't want to avoid answering you. I'm not being purposefully evasive.
How have you suffered then for choices you've made trying to stay true to yourself?
I haven't done a lot of shows like this, Bob, and
And that's probably been a big drawback in your life. As I see it, you've suffered because of it.
Well, I suppose, I guess that my career maybe suffers as a result of it. torn by the notion of being a private person and protecting myself and establishing boundaries. I consistently refer to a quote attributed to Humphrey Bogart, who said, "The only thing an actor owes his audience is a good performance." I'm torn between that and the desire to have people like me, to be, to receive approval, to get strokes. As a result, I violate boundaries that I've only moments before set up for myself. No, I'm not going to talk about that. Then the next thing I know, I'm talking about it. I've never talked about this before in one of these shows. So.
On the other hand, it seems to me that you've succeeded, at least in part, in getting across something. It may not be everything, but some sliver of your life that's true about you is part of your public persona.
Yeah, it's confusion, I think, would sum that up. I said earlier that my childhood was not a particularly happy one. This is a story that seems to be told by a lot of actors. I think that's what probably led me to become an actor. It was easier to pretend to be someone else.
Sure.
It was easier to lose oneself in some kind of fantasy.
When you hooked up with the committee?
24.
And they first came together, what, in the early 60s, 63,
the
64?
committee opened in 63 in San Francisco in the spring. And they had the first workshop in improvisational techniques open to the public in the fall of 64. And someone who was attending told me I should drop by, that I might enjoy it, that it was some interesting exercises.
Did audiences, in addition to appreciating you, because obviously you were successful and you were playing, I would guess, among the paying customers, to people who were more or less like-minded and they were of the same generation, but within that, were there some people who genuinely got upset? Did you hear catcalls and violent objections?
Catcalls? No, we'd heard very articulately stated political positions in opposition to our own. As a theater company, we were active in the anti-war movement in San Francisco. One of the key moments in my live theater life was as I came out to introduce a scene having a woman stand up down near the stage. It was cabaret theater. And loudly announce, I have 3 children at home, and if I thought they were going to grow up like you people, I would smother them in their sleep tonight. Now, come on, Earl, and began to get her husband and a couple with them together to leave the theater. And I was so stunned at the intensity and emotional honesty of her, this statement, that I was really trying to get her to stay, to talk about what it was that upset her so much. The audience, for the most part, took a rather derisive point of view toward her. There was a lot of derisive hooting. That's the phrase I was looking for. We invited the audience to stay and discuss this woman's reaction to the scene she'd just seen afterwards. One night during intermission, several of us had stepped out onto Sunset Boulevard, for a cigarette to get what passes for air in Los Angeles outside the theater. And this was 68, 69. And there were a couple of people being rousted by an LAPD squad car. They'd been pulled over. They were out of the car. They were being talked to in a, I wouldn't characterize it as a friendly fashion or a polite manner. So we went back into the theater and invited the audience to come out and watch their tax dollars at work. How the Los Angeles Police Department kept the streets safe and orderly. I can't even speak clearly now. I'm terrified, I guess, because I still live in Los Angeles, and they'll remember this. I'd say within 8 or 9 minutes, there were 8 or 9 squad cars there. There were uniformed officers out with clubs and mace saying, move back against the building, move back in the theater. A few of us in the theater company have said, it's a public sidewalk. We have a legitimate right to witness this arrest or this interrogation or this whatever is transpiring here. Move back. So we went back in the theater, and there were some people in the audience who had no idea, I guess, that things like that happened on the streets. We said, we'll continue with the show, But you were all invited to stay at the end of the evening to discuss this event in which you were not simply witnesses but participants. Those of you who had the can of mace right in your face. That discussion went on for several hours. That was interesting stuff, you know, because as you said earlier, the audience was not made up solely or by and large of people of our generation or people with like political views. There was a cross-section. There were people who understood that this group was funny and it was a hot ticket. Mm-hmm. And in short, there were people who didn't know what they were letting themselves in for when they came into the theater. Those were the people that I felt good about performing for and connecting with. It's nice when people laugh, but it's also nice when people are affected by something that happens in front of them to the point where they want to discuss it.
You were able to ad-lib almost everything that Johnny Fever did on WKRP because you had something of a DJ background yourself, right? You were one of the very first underground DJs before that term became commonplace.
Yeah, I just to make it clear, I was a full-time actor and had been for several years at the time. I did my brief DJ stint was as a favor to a friend in San Francisco, and I did 6 hours every Saturday afternoon on this sort of the forerunner of outlaw radio. Yeah. But we had an extraordinary writing staff for WKRP, starting with the man who created it, Hugh Wilson. Mm-hmm. But Hugh and I first met backstage in a club in Atlanta, Georgia, on a committee tour. And he came back and introduced himself to the company and just said he was in awe of what we did. The following year, I met him on the Bob Newhart show when he was there as an apprentice writer. The year after that, he was writing for a Tony Randall show. I'm talking about the old Bob Newhart show for MTM. Right. Following year, he was writing for Tony Randall. The year after that, he was producing Tony's Randall show. And on his fourth year in Los Angeles, he had created WKRP. So he knew that I had this background, and I asked if I might play with some of the dialogue in the pilot script, particularly the moment of transformation that Johnny Garavella goes through when I think he's called Johnny Sunshine at the moment, I don't remember, and he invents himself as Dr. Johnny Fever on the air.
So the new WKRP must involve some degree of fun for you. You're not on every episode, but you pop up now and then. Why go back to it? What enticed you to go back and update Johnny Fever?
I suppose the notion you can't go home again offers some sort of challenge. I liked the character. I liked doing the show. When I look at it in syndicated reruns, I for the most part, I'm really proud of what I did, and for the most part, the shows really seem to hold up. 3 of the original cast were returning. It was an opportunity to share some time with them again. It was also being given the opportunity to discuss storylines beforehand, to talk about what had happened, what might happen with the character in any given episode, to adjust my appearances there. If I said, yes, indeed, I'd like to do a show, that sort, to adjust that to my own schedule. So I guess what we're saying is that it's hard to pass up the opportunity to be a little tin god. I could say yes or no, and there's something about that experience that's very warm within my heart, just behind this microphone, and why not see if it still works? And I must say that it does feel very good.
Hesseman can be seen periodically, I guess is the way to put it, in the new WKRP in Cincinnati. Hope you enjoyed this half hour, and we're out of here for now. See you later. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for watching Cleveland Live Music. It's awfully bright out here. I'd click on another one of my videos. Quit looking into the sun. Your mother told you not to do that. Please hit the subscribe button. And if you want to support the channel more, there's GoFundMe and Patreon information in the video descriptions. Ooh, ooh!